So, hi Danielle. I think tonight it's episode 3, and we're going to be looking at a topic that goes around different circles around cord cutting. So, I know we're going to do a meditation at the end, but can you tell me a little bit for people who've never really thought about what cord cutting is, or they may have heard about it, but they don't really understand what that means, and maybe some of the reasons we might do that?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, I love that this is episode 3 because episode 3 is about the Holy Trinity, the mind, body, spirit collectively as one. And sometimes the body holds on to things that um, energetically that need to be removed from that aspect so that it may heal and clear for new space to come through. And when you're talking energy cutting, the cord cutting, it's because every time you have an interaction with anybody, there is some form of an energy connection there. And inside of that energy connection, you can either have a high quality experience or a low quality experience. And when we speak of energy cord cutting, we're typically talking about when we're moving beyond something, when we're trying to move forward outside of a relationship that we once had. And for me, cord cutting is for everything. You want to walk your highest timeline at all times. And so sometimes when we have experiences with people every day, you want to keep this foundation work that you created intact while letting all the extras kind of fall to the side. And so for me, cord cutting allows you to keep this beautiful open space, this heart space open, this love space continuously going back and forth. And it's kind of like cutting away dead ends. When we think of a cord cutting for people that you no longer want to associate with, or you're trying to move forward from and not have, we do the cord cutting, we leave that beautiful green cord still open, but you'll just imagine yourself to be cutting it a little deeper so that you won't feel the need to be connected to this person any longer. So cord cuttings work in both forms, just depending on what it is that you're looking to do. For me, I cord cut every day. I cord cut with everybody in my family, my closest friends, anybody I've come into contact with. And I only do it to a certain degree, knowing that I want to continue the relationships, but I don't want there to be a buildup of negative energy or any type of toxicity that can sit for if there's anything stagnant inside of the relationship. And so for me, when I talk about cord cuttings, it's just a way for you to feel energetically disconnected from things that aren't serving your highest purpose or your highest good.
That's really interesting, because even though this is a subject that I've been aware of for years and I've done some of the processes, from my perspective, and I think even the way it's been taught, it was always around doing that process when it was somebody that had been in your life that you didn't want in their life anymore. So I'm surprised to hear that actually it's something that you can do with your own family and the people around you. It's almost as though um, we want to clear any attachment that we've had with people in our lives that we don't want anymore. But you're talking about current relationships as well as any relationships we have that we've moved away from, whether that's work relationships or general relationships.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have this beautiful power inside of our grasp at all times. And we're so used to using this power only when it's time to step away that we forget that we're instilled with this type of power at all times. And as an empath or somebody that receives energy in a very big way, which most of us, when we talk about polarity, we're all in that same line where it's on one side's an empath and one side's a narcissist, and where's the temperature change from cold to hot, and so or from empath to narcissist. So we are all taking in energy all the time through conversations that we're having with other people, through the television shows we watch, through the interactions with even animals. And so when you are in a relationship with somebody, you want to continue having this beautiful, open relationship of love and consistency from this framework that you've built inside of love. And sometimes things get, somebody might have said something off-putting to you that day, but they didn't mean it, but the energy was still there. So why wouldn't you cut that? Why wouldn't you cut that piece away, knowing that there was no ill will, there was no ill intent, and the conversation that was had, or you set the boundary line. And so let's just go ahead and cut the cord to that energy line so that we aren't having to exist with that added dead end of growth that we don't need anymore. And so as far as for me, when I learned that I could do, and I didn't learn this from a book or online, I actually sat in meditation one time and they told me that this was something that we can do. And I've been doing it for about a year now, I would say. And every night, at least every other night, because some nights you forget, nobody's perfect here. And so, when I do it, I include every member of my family, including the man I sleep beside every night. And our relationship is strong. The depth of love is just as deep, if not deeper than it ever was, because I'm here cutting away the things that don't matter, the things that the little things that would cause stagnation inside of, not moving around, and realizing that that's not a make or break inside of the relationship. It just is what it is. It allows that level of detachment to stay intact, which is important for people trying to move forward inside of a relationship of any form. And so if you have this ability to cut away the things that don't keep you at this higher vibrational stance, or in this level of what I call the highest timeline, which is just you at your best, then absolutely we should take advantage of this knowledge and use it for day-to-day interactions that we have. And the beauty of it is you don't even have to remember their names or call their names. You can simply imagine their faces, or just put, a lot of times if I've run into, or I had conversations with people I'll never meet again, anybody that I have come into contact with today that that didn't serve my highest timeline, I would like to cut the energy cords. And then I have my entire imagining of what it is that looks like for me to cut the cords between these two people, which would be myself and then the other person. And then sometimes if I've met a lot of people, I just imagine all of these cords coming out of me, and I just do a 360 with a pair of scissors. And I just imagine that all of the cords that didn't fit my highest timeline be cut away. And then it just kind of makes me feel better. I walk in a sense of detached reality, or unattached reality to other people's thoughts and opinions. And it just makes it a much freer space to walk inside of.
So I just wanted to ask, because you've covered quite a few different ideas that exist within spiritual communities and wider, and terminology that some of us are familiar with and some aren't so much. So thinking about like energy, when we're talking about energy, what is it that we mean by that? What are we sort of describing on a day-to-day basis?
So for me, the way that I was able to connect the dots is when science proved that we're bioluminescent. When they can take a picture of us under a bioluminescent lens, or whatever that is, that we actually shine in an energy form of white light. So science is already showing that we're a materialized form of energy. So when I speak of energy, we can also talk aura, right? When we've all heard of what an aura is. And so your aura will change, your bioluminescent coloring will change based on a few things. First, what chakra system you're working in, and as if it's active. Second, at what frequency you're putting that out at, if you're overactive or underactive, or if you're sitting in the middle, like you should be. Or, and then energy also, I guess when I think of energy, everything is communicated in an energetic form. And unfortunately, we aren't ahead of times yet in the way, scientifically, in the way that we can, show what energy exchange looks like. but we're getting closer to that. So for me, when you speak of energy, energy is simply everything and everyone. That's birds, blades of grass, the sky. It's all a form of energy. And so if we're energetic beings, we're going to be sending and receiving energy back and forth. And so when I speak of energy, for me, it came just down to the fact that we are bioluminescent beings, which is a form of energy. And so energy must be exchanged. And how do we exchange it? And so that kind of led down that path for me. And that's how I discovered for myself the way energy, why I can speak in energy, is because we are energetic beings.
Thank you. And I guess a couple of other things as well that you've alluded to and are often much deeper topics when we think about some of the types of people. So in psychology, we might have different types, different personality types, different personalities. Type A personality, hard worker, focus, can end up with burnout, that sort of thing. Carl Jung's archetypes. And more recently, in the last couple of years, I've noticed on different platforms, the word empath is used a lot more, and often in relationship to narcissists. Now, I think on another evening, we can probably cover those two types that seem to come together for a variety of reasons in people's experiences. But just on the empath side, which I think a lot of people who are either new to the spiritual path, starting to open up and think about themselves and the world in a different way, or are coming across different information. What would an empath normally be like, or what is an empath?
So for generally speaking, if we're going to stick in the spiritual realms, an empath is just somebody that can feel another person's feelings, somebody that can walk in a room and at extreme cases, absorb the feelings, thoughts, and emotions of another energy being next to you. So empaths are simply put on the scale of polarity, the opposite of a narcissist. They feel deeply, they energetically attach to other deep feelers or people that have the capability of feeling deeply. And so for me, everybody is equipped as an empath. We just have to dip into that side of ourselves, as opposed to, and I know we're just talking on the empath side right now, but it is a polarity scale. We literally look at a temperature as hot and cold, but it's all the same temperature line, right? At what point does it become hot? And at what point does it become cold? We don't know. It's polarity, right? So we just stick on this. If we look at it as a rod across the board, empath being on one side, narcissism being on the other side, we are all created with the ability to be an empathic person, just like we're all created to have the ability to be a narcissistic person. This is why these are huge spiritual words right now, empath and narcissist, is because when you decide to claim yourself as an empath, you're only going to see these negative attributes without the realization that this is probably a reflection of something that you're quite capable of doing. And so when we speak empath, for me, I've noticed that people that tend to claim in the name of empath are hiding inside of some kind of a victim stance for themselves. Like, these things are happening to me. And so, which is completely normal. We have all been in that place. If we sit in the polarization of empath without taking on the responsibility of our narcissistic traits, you will sit inside of this victim pattern, because it does look like these things are happening to you. But as far as an empath goes, it's just a person that feels deeply, has this ability to pick up other people's energy, and it feels like it's your own.
Do you know, it's interesting. You're reminding me actually of, and I think this is almost like what you're saying, that we'll see a lot of these claims and statements of people who've recognized that they're deep feelers and they can sense the room and what's happening, and pick up these things from other people. But I recall possibly, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, I think there's been a evolution where, because people were recognizing they felt like this and that they would have these different experiences with people, there wasn't really much information out there. And I remember reading a book about highly sensitive people, which was another way of framing empath. And interestingly, sort of in my line of work, I remember reading a book by, actually, I don't know if you know, but you know Ali G? Who,
Yes.
yeah. So his
Yeah.
brother is a clinical psychologist, and he is a researcher at a highly experienced and respected academic. And he writes a lot, mostly about autism. And he's got quite a lot of research papers on that. But I actually read a book about what was called, he wrote a book called The Empathy Scale. Now this was quite interesting because it sort of relates to some of what you're saying, which is, on one end of the scale is the empath, and right on the other end of the scale, he was looking at psychopathology. And within psychopathology, now we're not going to get into clinical terminology tonight, because there is a difference in the UK and the US in terms of how some things are termed. We're not looking at this from a diagnostic mental health perspective. However, those themes do run through platforms like Quora, where people are saying, I'm coming into contact, he's a narcissist, he's a psychopath, or, any of this. But interestingly, the academics are looking at these things. And one of the key aspects really that I got from that book, about, it was called The Empathy Quotient, is how empathic somebody is. And some of the elements of that we spot in people who end up in the helping field, whether that is therapists, healers, social workers, family workers, were high in empathy. And then we had people who actually seem very low in empathy, and this crossed all sorts of borders within business, because is that, we were looking at having too much empathy. Is it harder then to make some business decisions? Do you need some more of the traits where you're low on empathy in order to, anyway? So he looked at that in detail on that continuum, and also looked at, contained within that, psychopathology, narcissistic traits. Do we also consider people who are neurodiverse as well? Is there a low level of empathy? And all of these conversations were looked at, but focusing on the empathy side of things, which is where a lot of people in the spiritual community, like what you're saying, claim themselves to be empaths. Well, they might be highly feeling and sensing people, but can get caught, as you say, in that victim mode. And I think, going to the conversation of what we started off looking at, is we're taking ownership by starting to practice some processes that help us become more empowered, so we don't stay in a place of being a victim, and can run those processes, so we're able to either cut the cords of people, situations, places, and experiences that we've got some connection with, that we want to move away from. And sometimes that has to be done several times. And also looking at the static that we build, that we collect in our energy field or auric field, of
Those gnats.
those gnats that we talked about in one of the other episodes, that just create an irritation or annoying interference. But like what you suggested, is they're not necessarily things that we have to really do anything about, but it's just something that stayed with us. And sometimes they stay with us for a variety of reasons, and we'll regurgitate those conversations or regurgitate any of those experiences. So it's just, I thought I'd just highlight that. That all sits within that much bigger field of psychology.
Woo! It makes me feel smart. No, I do, but yes, I do. For empaths, I think the reality of it is we all have tendencies to be on both sides of this. And what? Me? No. But I will say that when part of the taking the ownership and really gaining that empowerment as an empath
Yeah.
is, I had this beautiful meditation once, and it was all about looking in this mirror. And inside of this mirror, you take on, you think of this person's looking right at you. And in this, like as your mirror reflection, and you take on 1% of all the things you hate about them. 1%.
What, you take them on? You choose to take them on, or we have taken
Yeah,
them
you
on?
make the option, of course, that thing that the thing that irritates you the most about somebody. You take ownership of
Ah,
1% of it. And you say, okay, I have this in me as well.
right.
And it's for whatever reason, it seems to smooth the chaos, that chaotic line trying to come in. It makes you realize that it's the sense of empowerment is acknowledging that this is inside of you as well. You are capable of
Yeah.
all of these things, and that
Yeah.
you are making the choice to not fall into that pattern, to not fall into that behavior. And for me, it was very profound in that way, the recognition that not only do I know that I have that peace inside of me, because that's what's irritating me about it, it's that I am choosing, that I am making an active choice every
Own
day
it.
to rise above that behavior and sit in a higher perspective or a higher timeline or a higher vibrational sense. Yeah.
Right. So, Danielle, you've touched on something that influences pretty much every human being on the planet. So, and I think Freud was one of the early, I don't know if he created these concepts or it was a joint effort between him and his colleagues. But in a way, what you're talking about is a couple of things that goes on in society where we can see things in other people. Why does she do that? Why does he do that? He's like this, they're like that. It's like this. And what we do, what can be happening is we are projecting the aspects of ourselves that we don't own or see, as that's part of our shadow, out there on other people. And what you're
Well,
talking about,
another like a religious or Christian aspect would call that a demon. Your
yes,
demons,
if
your
you want
demons coming
to-
to life, and these people becoming demons. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So,
I'm not sure I've ever called any of my projections a demon, but I'm sure, like what you're saying, in certain
well, if you aren't
communities.
paying attention to that projection, eventually it will become the demon.
Yeah, and anything that actually upsets, irritates, disturbs you, because disturbed thoughts and getting really caught in what you said earlier, those patterns and cycles, then can take you down a very dark place if that's the
Absolutely.
place that you live in. So I can sort of understand the metaphor of that, in that way, of that landscape. And on a very sort of light note, we can all do it every day with someone's looked at us in a particular way and we interpret as meaning this, and of course this person is like this. So the easiest way to really start to understand yourself is understand how will we always interacting and responding to other people. um it's not, I'm not sure how common that understanding is, but I think, like what you're saying, is part of the empowerment is by recognizing that no matter how spiritual and wonderful we are, and whether you claim to be on a spiritual path or not, is that we have these aspects of ourselves, we have these fault lines, or we have these ways of seeing things, that once we recognize that we're doing that, when we can do something different about it, it's often not recognized. People can often do that without realizing it. So yeah, it's interesting that you know this is a probably one of the biggest things in society that we walk around doing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah.
It's, for me, this empowerment movement, I feel like sometimes the information gets buried. And
Mm.
the reality is, we sit here in this state of you must forgive, you must forgive, you must forgive. And the reality of it is it's much different than what we've imagined forgiveness to look like.
Mm.
It's acknowledging that you chose not to do those things. You chose not to repeat that cycle. You made sure that you weren't going to be the person that continued on whatever you experienced. And that's part of the forgiveness, and that all sits in that polarity scale. It all sits in the levels of what you're really ready to acknowledge within yourself, because we're all capable of terrible, horrible things, but we're all capable of really amazing, beautiful things. And
Mm,
that tells you right there the duality of who we are and why we have to take this dual nature and create a scale on it, a polarity scale, if you will, and allow ourselves to, um,
see it in from all
yeah,
those aspects. So is
yeah,
that what you meant when you referred to timeline earlier? Because, if I carried on thinking or behaving in a particular way, so say, I don't know, I go into work and I'm miserable and grumpy with people and I'm not generous and and that will spark a response in other people. So the timeline that I'm on is then possibly initiating conversations or being cool and aloof to people, and it's not conducive then, is it, to warm, loving, supportive relationships. So that timeline that I'm on takes me down this path of people moving further and further away from me and not maybe willing to support me, or just, oh, that's Mel, she's always grumpy, when she comes
right,
into work. And you see that, don't you? So the
yeah,
way is I become aware of that and realize that's actually not my intention. What can I do? I create some new strategies or behaviors to have a different effect. So is that what you mean by timeline, in a
yeah,
way that you change
yeah.
things, you change your
So
timeline?
for me, a timeline is simply put the position that you're in versus the position you want to be in,
Right.
and what pattern you're going to take or walk that's going to be slightly different, if not completely different than the pattern you've been walking, so that you
Mhm.
can reach this, instead of a faded path of everything happens to me, I can't help the next step, to this empowerment of this, I'm going to create my destiny path. That I know that these things right here don't make me happy. This is not the timeline I want to be in. So I'm going to choose a higher timeline. I'm going to choose something that's going to fit me, a higher vibrational being, a person that's ready to see myself better, more accomplished, more in love with life than I am in my current position. So for me, a higher timeline is just the goals we set for ourselves, the things that make us determined in life, the things that promote creativity and excitement to be here. The more you're closer to that, the higher you are inside of a frequency, and then of course, a higher timeline. The timeline I was walking was a very faded timeline. I was living a life based on other people's choices and actions, and I thought I didn't have a choice inside of that. When I realized I did, I began creating the things I wanted to see in my life, the
Mm.
intention and manifestation. And when I decided that that was something I had control over, you're now creating your own timeline. You're creating your own destiny. You're creating your own vibration, the legacy you want to leave behind. And so for me, a timeline, we can make it as esoteric as we want, but simply put, it is something you want to see yourself doing. And that timeline can start small. It can say, I want more love in my life. And then you build it, I always started with self and worked my way out. So my higher timeline began with self. I want to trust myself more. I want to
Mm.
feel the courage inside of me. I know that's there. And so I heightened my timeline for my personal self. Then
Mhm.
I went to family and my relationship with my husband. It's time to work on these things. I need to create a life that I want to be in, and not one that I feel like everything is just happening chaotically around me. And so I created a new pattern to step into a new family dynamic. And then that went to friendships. And then now it's in the business world for me. And I, as you and I have continued this process, I began shifting out of these victimhood stances that would leave me overwhelmed
Mm.
to, okay, I'm responsible for these certain things. I don't have to think about a future in that, like how hard it could possibly be. Instead, I'm going to take steps in the direction of empowerment in this business world, so that my timeline shifts into something that I want to see. So for me, a timeline is just you deciding your destiny and walking in that path.
But it sounds like there's a whole range of steps you've just mention the word steps to that space, because there might be a lot of people around who think that what they're experiencing
It's not an overnight thing, that's for sure.
yeah, I'm getting overwhelmed and I've heard this is quite common, every time I go to this group or I can't cope with the energy, I'm getting overwhelmed, there's too much noise, I'm feeling frazzled. So that's that recognition of maybe I am highly empathic and I can pick up on these feelings. But what you're then saying, it sounds like, is the first step of taking responsibility for our part in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. You are not at the mercy of this world.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as an empath, when crazy, wild things happen to you, because they really do. And a lot of us will just keep it quiet, because then we sound crazy, because that person is giving you bad energy, but then you sound like a wild, off the chain lady, because you've decided that this person is definitely feeding you energy that is not healthy for your sustainability or your homeostasis.
But like
So
what you said earlier, though, energy is just energy, isn't it? And if we
yeah,
perceive that person as bad, negative, all
transmuting.
of that, we've just literally labeled them in that polarized position of I'm
Yeah,
feeling all this stuff, it's their fault, they're the one that's
it's
wrong,
all them.
it's
But you
all
don't
them.
realize how strong you are and how empowered you can be in that. And what
Yeah.
a thing to have yourself be the person that walks in a room and feels that everybody's out to get you, to being the person that walks in the room and do what we call
Yeah.
transmuting, turning water into wine,
Mm.
and making that negative energy into a learning possibility, or how can I shift this to where I'm in a win-win. And you would be amazed at how simply you could do that when you take ownership of what it is you're feeling. I think you and I had spoken. I don't think we recorded this, but one of the things that I would recommend for any empath walking into a room is checking yourself first,
Yeah.
taking 3 deep breaths, knowing where you are emotionally, like, okay, I feel this way,
Mm.
then walk in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And if all of a sudden you're anxious, you feel depressed, you feel angry, you feel any feeling that is outside of the space that you were in before walking in that door, you then have you can immediately create empowerment. These aren't my feelings.
Yeah.
I recognize that these are not my feelings. And so at the beginning, I would tell somebody to create a circle around themselves of protection. The white light circle works really well. The imagine salt being around you, that's the equivalent of a white light circle. Imagine you, like, if you have this beautiful imagination, imagine yourself turning this negative into a positive, by putting 2 positives together or something, just creating something really interesting so that you can take back that power. And as an empath, that is probably one of the greatest strengths we have, is turning that water into wine, taking that temperance card and using your skills and changing whatever place you walk into, okay, this is my place, then I'm going to create the vibration, I am going to walk, and nobody's going to penetrate that.
It's
Very
interesting
empowering.
though. Yeah, definitely. Because the point you made about checking yourself out first before you go in a room, because it reminds me early on when I was working as a therapist in schools, and I was working almost full time. So I was seeing kids or teachers or parents back to back. And I remember going through this phase of noticing sometimes feeling really tired, really flat, really energized, all of these different states, and going through this process similarly to what people who, talk about being empathic is about and what they notice. So I was kind of curious. I was like, what's happening here? And that's what I started to do. So I started to practice the energy ideas that came from Reiki, because I did Reiki at the time. And this idea that something's happening, something's going on, and I don't know, is it me? Is it them? What am I picking up? So I thought the only way to sort of test this out is exactly that. So while I was sat in the room, I would ground myself, I would do some breathing, I'd do some meditation. and I would notice how I felt. And what was interesting, I started to notice as each different person came into the room, how that energy shifted. But now, rather than sitting there feeling like every time I walk in a room, I'm going to be really overwhelmed and overpowered, I was then even more curious to say, okay, so how will this interaction go? Because logically there weren't any ideas, but how is this interaction go? I wonder what's going to happen next, because I didn't feel like I was at the mercy of the world. And that was a really interesting phrase you used. But I did notice that there was something happening that was waylaying my energy. And I really didn't want to feel sleepy at 1 o'clock when I still had another 3 clients to see. So for me, I guess it was about taking responsibility as a therapist, because we're trained to do that. So our role is to be available, responsive, and create the right environment so that the client that enters that space feels safe, and you can use your skills, but also use that space in whatever way to help them shift out of what are unhelpful states. So in some senses, they're borrowing our brain, or we're harnessing our systems to support theirs that may reboot, or whichever. But yeah, so I'd apply that process, and over time I looked at it, and we've talked about this before. I became the scientist, curious in what's happening with each of these people. How can I utilize this information that's coming that isn't verbal? It was a sensation. And as I started to do that, information was coming to me about them that they weren't necessarily sharing on a verbal level. I might notice it in their body language. And this is where my intuition actually really started to open up as well.
Well, I think, first of all, everybody needs a therapist like you. It's my therapist slash guru. But
Not sure they'd all agree with that, but
well, whatever. I'm not asking their opinion, so there's that. So, but with you, it's you said exactly what it is, and this is what all humans need to do, which is, your part of your experience here on this earthly plane is to learn from others,
yeah.
and put on that scientific hat and say, how can I learn from the way this person is making me feel? If I'm feeling tired when I'm in their presence,
Is it mine? Is it theirs? Is it both?
Exactly. And then deciding from there if that type of interaction is for you anymore. But as a therapist goes, and this is a lot of how now, obviously you and I have had many a discussion where I take it too far, and then I just start harming myself. Right. But, as a therapist, you have to sit there, and even if that client brings in this level of energy that doesn't feel good to you, and it's almost repulsive to you, that's still a client.
Yeah.
And so you're still
the contract's different. So
yeah.
And I guess that's the difference in, so the sort of standard joke is that, if you're at a party, are you therapizing everyone? And you're not, because you're just really, you're within the therapy contract, you're there to facilitate something for that other person. It is an interaction, but the power dynamic is different. And you utilize that information to either help them dissipate whatever is there, the charge in the system, or help them understand it, or help them find some strategies to move through.
And then as a human in
trickier.
a regular position, it is not your job to do
No,
those things,
exactly.
right? Yeah. So, but
your job is to take ownership and to notice what's going on and recognize your part, because the contract is different. So it's not clear in relationships, at least in therapy. It's like, I will see you once a week for this amount of time. This is how much money it's going to cost. And this is how many weeks you might want to come and see me for. And we'll review that. And we take the lead for making sure that conversation happens. It gets trickier in friendships, or in community relationships, or family relationships. And even if you do that, you haven't really control over another person, because the dynamic is completely different with everybody. So you can use the skills, to that degree, as you've said. But then what you have to do is, because with therapy, you're only going to see clients for a certain amount of time. Sometimes, some people work with them for a long time. And with friendships and family, family members are going to be in and out. Some of them are going to be there longer. Some you haven't seen for years. And with friendships, as we grow, some of those relationships will grow and some of them won't, and we move forward, because that's what life's about. And so this is how we need to think a little bit differently. But how can we apply the spiritual concepts and the psychology concepts, and how can we help us understand, no matter what model we're talking about, anything we learn that is information that helps us understand ourselves and the world that we interact with. If it's useful right now. And if it gives us some tools to do something right now. And in this instance, what we're saying is some of the relationships are malfunctioning and others are just, he's moody, she's moody, and we've picked up some of that. How can we clear that? And this is about the energy clearing, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when we're speaking about empaths and we're taking on these, we're walking into new patterns, we're trying to take control of our lives. You're not here to be anybody's therapist. And you gave
Yes.
me my final lesson in that, which was you don't have to lower yourself to
No.
to where they're at to get your point across. You speak at your level and
Yeah.
they can come up to it or not. And that's their choice. And I did just have a client this past week that came through, and I had to explain to her that, he's either your husband, and if they're having a bad day or they're having, a bad moment, or they want to get something off their chest, or they want to just freely express themselves about a situation, that's one thing. But if a person's having inner child trauma that's coming up, or they're having, these PTSD type experiences, as an empath, you want to latch onto that and you want to help them. But the reality is it's not your responsibility. And so the best thing that you can really do is outsource to something that allows them that space to speak freely and to have that type of help.
Yeah, often it's just about recognizing the relationship, what's contracted in that relationship. So if it's a partner, you can support, but if the level of support, and it's a bit like, how do we know the difference between people who really need mental health support and those that don't, is how much of what's going on interferes in your day-to-day life. So if something's really interfering in your day-to-day life, you need to get help, and they get help.
Because your symptoms are now starting to fall into patterns inside of our relationship, and that's not healthy for either one of us. Your root cause, once it begins to spill out into a relationship in a symptomatic form, you have to make that decision for yourself. What are my boundary lines? What is a healthy way for me to successfully walk forward with this person? And I will tell you, it is not being their therapist. That there's a reason why we have these highly trained individuals that have these services available. And I know that not everybody can afford therapy, but that still is not your partner's responsibility. It's just not.
No, and I think it's recognizing, as we've talked in earlier episodes, what part, or who you are, what your role is with anyone. And I think being able to discern those things, and I think it goes back to what you said earlier. We need to know ourselves. We take those deep breaths and we feel how we feel. If we're in a fairly okay state most of the time, it's going to be obvious. If we're not, and we've come from our own history of problematic interactions and family experiences, it's not going to be as clear. But over time, with doing more and more deep breaths and having those pause moments in everything that goes on in life, will help us do that. And no, and I think that's what empaths often don't realize they take on board. Some of them unconsciously take it on board, and a lot of people consciously take it on board that I'm going to help you heal. I'm going
Right.
to sort things out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And when I was first learning how to not take on things, it's funny because we give this empath role, the equivalent of an angel on earth.
Mm,
But the reality is empaths also come with a laundry list of toxic behaviors, and that
yeah.
includes control.
Mm,
And the reality is, we can all agree upon this, you have control of yourself and
mm,
your reaction to others. And if it falls out of your control, which is self, then you have no control in it. So now you only create boundary lines and things that feel good to you for self. And we don't, as we're working through this, obviously boundaries are going to change and they're going to move, and they're
mm,
going to do all of these things. But if you are not actively pursuing self, and inside of that self, creating the boundary lines around that self, it's going to be easy to fall into those patterns of control, or those patterns of needing to save, or needing to be the person that they come to, because I've experienced that myself. I've been that person.
mm, mm,
And the reality is once I took on the acknowledgement that I can't control anybody else. I can't control their outcome. I can't control what went on in their head. I can't control their past.
mm.
The only thing I can control is what I will and will not accept inside of my personal self, my personal boundaries. It becomes a lot more clear what you will and will not put up with.
But I think, and I think we can go into a lot more depth in that in another episode, because I think what we're talking about tonight is probably for someone who may just be aware, and it might just be starting to come through as a little bit of dissatisfaction, disharmony, agitation, irritation, because we can often override those feelings with an interaction or a day out. We've gone to the shops and we've felt great, and we had an interaction, we come back, we didn't feel so great, or something bigger than that. So for somebody that's just becoming aware that they are moving out of a state of being okay into not being okay, or they're just starting to become aware that actually they're always feeling not okay, the first step is to create the space, take some deep breaths, have some time out, and see if you can get yourself into any state of being okay. Now, sometimes feeling peaceful is a bit too far for people to reach. Feeling
Absolutely
happy is
it
too
is.
far for them to reach. Feeling joyful is too hard to reach. So when that's
I
why I
always
use
tell
term,
people to try to reach a neutral zone. I
yeah,
understand that you can't love yourself, and you can't love this, and you can't be this, you can't.
yeah,
So, and let's just hit a neutral. And if we hit neutral zone, it opens the space up for you to make a choice,
yeah. Or they might even, because if you live mostly, so if we talked about life in percentages, if every day your life in terms of 100%, you are mostly in a not good feeling state, and people have to identify what that means for them, then the first activity is, okay, if I take some deep breaths and have some time out, what can I do to get myself into a better state? Then, as you're then talking, the next phase is, okay, I'm having these interactions. These are the ones I can leave behind because they are too toxic. They're not serving me. And I got embroiled in a whole range of stuff that, now I know different, I might not have done. But these are some of the other interactions I'm having that just interfere in that state. Uh, you know, so, and that's what we're talking about, cord cutting. So should we sort of talk a bit more about that process, and then I think we're leading into a meditation, aren't we, as to
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. Going back to the process, the reality of this process is, it takes, when you want to align yourself, you have to align yourself in the three, which is the mind, body, spirit, right? So as we're aligning, this isn't a cure all. This isn't okay, I cord cut it, I literally am the best ever, I have nothing left to unpack. This is just
No, it's not.
right. This is just for one part of your etherical body to grasp this understanding. We are trying to hit all three levels of your understanding of self. And part of that is by cutting these cords. It allows this state of mind. It creates a state of mind inside of you that says, I no longer am accepting, when we're cord cutting to remove somebody, I'm no longer accepting this behavior in my life. And it sets a tone for yourself, for your subconscious mind. It sets this tone that otherwise you might not have reached if you just consciously say, I don't mess with that person anymore. So if you
Yeah.
sit down in some type of meditative form and you take your deep breaths and you ground yourself and you begin this process of cord cutting, it allows that unconscious aspect of your mind, that shadow side of your mind, to come into an understanding that your conscious mind already has. So it's just
Yeah.
another step in the process of moving forward inside of empowerment and understanding and knowing what I refer to as a luminous warrior, a warrior for love, but trying not to leave the imprint of hate and bitterness behind. And so this just kind of sets you into a pattern of, I can still release and it not be drama fueled and it not be traumatic for
Yeah.
people involved. And I think at the end of the day, the more we can do that, the easier life will become for you.
And I guess one of the things I learned through the process of trying the cord cutting is you start to realize who are the people that still bug you, even if, or the situations that still bug you, even 3 weeks, 4 weeks down the line. And I remember, I think it's happened to me pretty much every year or different jobs that I've done. There always seemed to be one person that I could have the slightest um uh like time with, a 5-minute meeting or something. And then for hours afterwards, or days, it's happened in other circumstances. And and as much as I'm pretty self-aware and I've done a lot of training, and I would have this loop going around in my mind, and now I've applied and not in exactly the same way that you're going to do it, the process of reflecting on that, what is that about? Because now because I've practiced so long of wanting to stay in a good state and be in a peaceful state, I notice really rapidly when that changes.
Yeah, it's funny because as you were saying that, I would get the little thought patterns. My guides come through and they're like, clear your throat chakra and you won't have that issue. And it's true because,
Yeah.
as people that have walked the path of, becoming a more empowered, more beautiful, more happy, more joyful, more peaceful version of ourselves,
Mm,
that we all we've all fallen in that pattern of just trying to keep the peace, trying to be that luminous person, but nobody ever said that being kind didn't mean that you don't speak the truth.
mm,
I mean, one of the most profound things I ever heard was, nice as a doormat that people walk upon and wipe their feet on. Kind is somebody that will tell you the truth even if it's hard for you to hear,
mm.
because it's out of kindness and it's out of love. And a lot of times when we have these empathic people on a pattern of trying to be more spiritual, we confuse the kindness and niceness. And so when we use
Yeah.
that throat chakra inside
Yeah.
of this empathic, which is, I don't like the way you're treating me, or I don't like how I'm feeling, let's discuss that. And these are all things that can help the Sicilic mind from overturning and turning it into mush, and now we're drinking the soup of this thing that we cannot shut down inside of us. And so that's been a big lesson of mine. I think you and I have had several conversations where I'm like, I should have just said it, or I'm beating myself up or whatever. And the reality is, if I would have just spoken
Mm,
out loud the things I was feeling, because they're from my heart and they're my feelings, therefore they're valid, you know, that we would clear a lot of these repeating thought patterns inside of us. And
Yeah.
that takes time. Like
Well, it's
being,
growth, isn't it? And that's what I've discovered uh, is that sometimes there's a lot of that. So we've probably been, all of us, at some stage in our lives where the drama or the infused relationships, there's so much going on, there's so much static we've got to filter through step by step as we become more empowered. And also we start to consider what are the conversations I need to have right now, and what can I attend to, and what I'm not sure about, and I can and then the timing of that gets better. Or
well, you're just taking me straight to.
Hi, sorry about that, we got interrupted.
So when we talk about human design and gene keys, and when we're talking about the way we circle things, the way we decide to take in information, these are really good resources for ourselves, to kind of see how our personal design is, how based in this pattern of the way you were born, the time you were born, and the alignment of everything else, you have a personality. And this personality becomes, either in alignment with how you were meant to be, or you get further and further off course. And this works really well with the gene keys and with human design. You choose the one that speaks to you. But even in the most basic of these, it will tell you your consistent pattern. So if, say, your not self theme would be bitterness, right? And you find yourself in a bitter position, well, right in that moment that you need to focus back on self and where I became bitter. What were the things that happened that ended up with the effect of bitterness? And now we're reclaiming our power inside of this constant cyclical mind trap that we get ourselves into on a conversation that really, at the end of the day, did not matter. The drama of it is not going to matter in the end. But we are, a lot of times we're designed in these ways that the way we pick it apart is the opposite of how our truest self comes through. And if we can learn something more about ourselves through gene keys or human design, you'll know when you're off pattern, based off of, your thoughts keep going through and they're this negative thought pattern, you can't shut it down. Well, now we're just going to train our brain on how to redirect that thought pattern. Okay, well, here's my not self theme of bitterness. I can feel it coming through by the way my thoughts are happening. Let's now pick those pieces, because the thought's there anyways, right? I'm picking it apart anyway. I might as well be productive about it. And so when you become productive inside the thought pattern and say, I claim this responsibility, this accountability, and the rest was completely boundary and impeding, then I know the next time that there's a conversation that I'll be able to speak up, because I know that I just hit a not self theme.
So in a way, what you're taking us towards, and I think it'd be really interesting, fascinating to do that in another episode, won't it? Around some of the models that we can access. So the gene keys and the human design are two models, a bit like some of the psychology models, that help us really understand the different facets of ourselves, of some of those traits that.
What is it? The psychology one? Is it Briggs? The
Myers-Briggs, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's one of them.
Yeah, so that's one of them. And so, we are very eager to get on these types of, to answer these questions, kind of figure out more about ourselves. Well, this is the same thing. It's just teaching you in a different form. So any route that you want to take to learn more about yourself, obviously it doesn't have to take this spiritual side of the gene keys and the human design. You can take these different psychological tests that will help you. But I have learned that inside of gene keys and inside of human design, it almost gives you this space to decide how you now take your next steps. Instead of just stating this is how you are, it teaches you kind of what is an alignment and what's the opposite, what's on one side of the scale and what's on the other side of the scale. And so human design and gene keys not only tell you the details of, say, one of these psychological testings, but they'll also give you kind of a reference point to get you to the next phase. Say, if my not self theme is bitterness, well, these are the things that I'm bitter in. So how can I take a pattern step to get me into the not bitter theme? You're muted.
I guess the best way to, whatever the model is that people use that they've read up on, is they can understand how that applies to them, and then use the everyday experiences that can give them more of an indicator as to what they need to look at. And especially if it bothers them, because that's usually the key, isn't it? I'm irritated because, okay, so I can look at this. So the models help us understand who we are and some of the challenges that we may face in the journey of life, and some of those everyday interactions. Some of them are big, some of them are small. And a colleague of mine was saying to me the other day, when we were talking about a program we're setting up, that what she helps clients understand is that you can be merrily going around, going about your day-to-day life, and then you get a bill that comes through, and the bill can be for way over anything that you've got in your bank account. So she works to help people understand what's the trigger. So what's the thing that triggered the response that you've had? And if the response is really strong, if it's chaotic, or you're really angry, you're really upset, you're really distressed, that can be something that's then connected to some past deeper traumas, and that trauma has been activated. So some people can have a really be aroused and really have a strong response to something, and that would totally derail them for the day. And other people can be triggered on a smaller level, like what I was saying earlier. You can have an interaction with a colleague and it stays with you for a few days and goes around in your mind. So I think on other sessions that we do, I think it'd be great to go into share more. I'm not sure how common the understanding is around the gene keys and human designs, but shall
Very
we look
interesting. Gene
Yeah,
keys and human design is a very interesting scientific approach to the understanding of
yeah,
human, like individuals as human beings. And so it's very interesting. Obviously there's going to still be a lot of studies and things that need to be done to prove any type of validity to these
yeah.
things, but at the end of the day, you can't deny when you're walking in that path and it's changing your life, that it's doing
That it's
something.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
guess that's like with any information, it's if it's relevant and the information helps. Because what I love about the gene keys, which the model, these books online that explain that in more depth, or you can go on the website and have a look. What I love about that, it looks at what are the different facets of our personalities, and within those facets or within the spheres, there will be challenges. And once we've worked through the challenges, we then start to experience the gift, the
Yes.
gift that comes. So our challenge in life can be communication. So you've, talked earlier about the throat chakra. So Taurians, me being a Taurian, is synonymous with having troubled throat chakras. We get sore voices, sore throats, and might get strained throats. I get that on and off, and that can be linked with early childhood experiences of how you can communicate. And so this comes up in that model, it comes up in other models as well. So once we break through that, which interestingly I never would have thought in a million years, when I started on this journey and doing, got into psychology and everything, when I hated, excuse me, doing presenting at college when we were doing case studies, or doing videos, and we had to record ourselves in the first year, and then the second and third year we were videoing ourselves. I found it horrendous. So if somebody would have said to me 20 years ago that you're going to be doing podcasts or on YouTube or live on some show, I'd have ran a mile.
You would have said, "Nah, I don't know which version of me you're talking to, but it's not this one."
It's
But
not this
yeah,
one.
yeah,
Yeah. So the challenge for me was communication.
yeah, and
And
it's a huge challenge
yeah,
because especially if we're going to gender role these things,
yeah.
women are taught to be quiet and meek, and men are supposed to be loud and powerful. Well, what happens to a masculine who on one side of the field is told to be loud and powerful, but when he gets
Mm,
home, his voice is diminished and he's not allowed to speak out?
mm,
Well, now you're working with these chaotic energies that something's going to have to bust through, right? And it
yeah,
typically comes in
yeah,
the form of shyness or in this deep fear of any type of public speaking or any type of
yeah.
speaking, period.
Mm,
And so I did want to wrap up with the empath thing and just say very simply, with an empath, you have to learn, if empath is the spiritual path that you are choosing to take, you are going to have to make the active choice every day of empowerment.
mm-hmm.
It is required of this path, is one of the strongest paths you can take, because you are required to have a level of self-trust and acknowledgement that other paths don't necessarily need, because you are taking the opposite role of the narcissist. And
Mm,
it is a very demanding role in a society that has been taught that only an extreme form of narcissism exists. We walk into narcissistic behaviors all
every day.
day,
Yeah.
every day. And so if you're going to take this path of this path of being an empath, it is your responsibility to empower yourself, strengthen yourself, and be ready to take on the day through your choices, not other people's choices. The empath role is a very sacred role. It is a very profound role. But
Mm.
those who walk in the path tend to get stuck in the victimhood side of it, and they forget that they're the ones with all the power.
So the process that you're going to walk us through in a moment is one of the tools, and an effective tool. And I think you said earlier, if we apply any of the tools that we learn consistently, and we can change our mind as to the tools we use, so that you're going to walk us through that in a moment. Yeah. So anyone who's listening, um, get yourself either relaxed in your chair or in your room, depending on what time zone you're in. If you want to experience the process and then go about your day, set the intention to be wide awake and alert after having, sort of moments of reflection. But if you want to really chill and relax, just listen to the process and allow your mind to drop into that and your system to drop into that. And enjoy the process and then notice what else comes to you, because sometimes we allow ourselves to go a little bit deeper. Insights will start to emerge that help you on your path, and that's what this is about, isn't it? Where people having some tools to help them understand what's going on in life and how they can empower themselves, rather than just consistently typing up things on a platform and staying or drowning in that conversation and never being able to shift out of that, because that's not empowering. So Danielle, thanks for that really wide range of information that you've shared. So
Well, thank
I
you.
think we'll start to go into the next phase.
Okay. In our little, oh, you're recording again.